also particular thanks to both Grace and Nicole. I think the program committee did a nice job putting together the content of it, but everything that's resulted in a smooth and efficient conference that one attendee on Twitter said was the closest that they've felt to a real conference is due to the coordination and work that they've engaged in over the last year, really making sure that HUVA and the legendary GatherTown environments worked as well as they did. For many of you behind the scenes, ensuring that there's redundancies, you've got alternate hosts in case someone doesn't show up and so on. So that end, huge congrats and thanks to both Nicole and Grace for making sure it was really an effortless and effectively run event. Really a model for how these kinds of conferences should be run. And those of you that joined for yoga yesterday, it was fantastic to see everyone there. Even Vita dropped in for yoga. I think it's a newfound passion of his, so I suspect we'll start to see him at the local yoga studio more often. So that's all exciting. The other thing that I find, I just want to make a quick point before I do hand it off to Scott, is observing sort of the shape and structure of LAC, the way it's developed. I hope for those of you that are here for your first conference, that you feel at home, that you feel that this is a community where you are respected and valued and welcomed. I hope that you felt that it's a place where you can explore, grow, and develop in your own research and your own research programs. The presentation that was shared yesterday that Javier, based on what he's put together, the impact and the structure of LAC over the last 11 years has been really fantastic to see. But one area that isn't reflected in the numbers and in the papers and in those kinds of activities are the number of related programs that have developed as a result of this. And what I mean by related programs, I'm talking about professorships in learning analytics, doctoral or postdoctoral positions in learning analytics research. There's a growing number of research labs across US, Europe, and well, apparently everything is in Australia when it comes to learning analytics, so terrific increase in that as well. So when you look at and when you see the structure of learning analytics as a field, I encourage you to see the ways in which it's creating opportunities for faculty, researchers, and research students. And that's been probably one of the most fantastic outputs of these programs and online degree programs such as the MS Learning Analytics at University of Texas, the number of streams that what Ryan put together when he was at Teachers College, at UPenn and others. So there's a growing amount of energy and a growing amount of research and practice that goes well beyond what you see just within LAC. And that takes really a global community to do, and just a huge shout out for everybody that's been involved in those kinds of things. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our final keynote speaker. Scott Freeman, probably the easiest thing to do here for those of you. I'm not going to read his bio. You can Google him, but he is currently a lecturer emeritus in biology at University of Washington. He continues to do research around active learning techniques and how that impacts student performance. I know him through his 2014 paper, which is, I believe, his best cited work, looking at how active learning increases student performance in science, engineering, and mathematics. So without much else, feel free to Google Scott, and I will throw it over to you.
Thank you, George, and thank all of you for being here. Should be a really fun hour together. And I'm going to warn you, I told the conference organizers, I'm not going to lecture you about active learning. So I'm going to pause often and give you a cue of something I want you to respond to, idea to throw out, or a graph to interpret, or whatever. And if you could keep HUVA open in the Q&A or the comment area, George will be monitoring it for us, and he'll look through and monitor that and let me know what kind of feedback you guys are proposing. And when I'm teaching in class, I only have to do this once. I'll throw a question out, and if nobody's responding, thinking, oh, I just sit here for a few minutes and then he'll tell me. I don't do that, so to avoid long, awkward pauses in our progress here today, please get on HUVA and let me know what you think. All right, let's get started. I'm just Zoom sharing here. So today's title, sorry, my window disappeared. I'll be just a second.
No worries, Scott.
There we go. So the title for today is Evidence Basis for Inclusive Teaching in Undergraduate STEM Majors. And so I know you guys work in all sorts of fields and departments. The focus today is on STEM. Some of the areas as our other fields are a little under-researched right now, or I may just be ignorant. So bear with me with my focus on STEM, and the work should translate for everybody here. All right, so a couple different questions for today are going to structure our session together. First is I want to show some data on this question of just how important is your work as someone in the learning analytics community. Second question we're going to address with data out of my group is how active learning impacts overall student population in STEM, and we're focused on undergrads in this session. And last thing, we'll look at a fair amount of data, most of it very new, published within the last year, on does evidence-based teaching, or can it help our institutions achieve equity and outcomes, which inspired the title of this talk. Okay, so the first question, just how important is your work? So here's my first claim. Colleges and universities need to make evidence-based decisions about teaching. And you know, for academics, this should be a no-brainer, because we're supposed to be evidence-based people and evidence-based decision makers. But as you're all too well aware, I'm sure that's not always true. So, for example, this paper from the Marilyn Staines and colleagues published in Science a couple years ago quantified that most faculty, this statement at the top, most faculty still teach, at least in STEM, via lecture. And this was data from the US and Canada. So my question is why? And to answer it, I want you guys type into Whova. Anybody know, if you follow my cursor here, who's this man? Anybody recognize who that is? George, let me know if anybody has an idea here.
Sure, I'm just waiting in Whova. I've got a no, and another no, and a nope, and a no, and a no idea, and a question mark.
He's a
Lorenz.
Thank you. There it is. There it is. Yeah, he's a Nobel. This.
There was a Tim McKay offered as well, who's a member of the learning analytics community. So
awesome.
Anyway.
It's Conrad Lorenz. He's a Nobel Prize winner, which only unless in animal behavior. So unless that was your field, you'd have no reason to know. Okay, this is going to be harder though. Some people might be aware. Who are these birds and what are they doing? If you know anything about Conrad Lorenz's work. Can you pick up on that one?
Following, duck imprinting, they're learning, follow the leader.
Yes. Excellent. So Lorenz's, one of his contributions to animal behavior was described this phenomenon, was considered a very crude, maybe the crudest form of learning, called imprinting. And these geese imprinted actually on his boots. So they think his boots are mom, I'm going to follow that thing and stay safe. So what does that have to observation about this photo and the nature of imprinting have to do with this, my question of why most faculty still teach via the lecture? So if you were in my class, I'd have you talk to each other in a group, and then I'd have a randomized class list, and I'd call on you by random, but I don't have that. So you're going to have to offer your 2 cents in Whova. What do these goslings have to do with faculty?
Comments basically are that's how they were taught. Imitation, apprenticeship by observation, tradition, teachers following, no PD on how to teach. It's a practice that scales, takes more time and effort. They're following the trend. Students find it comfortable as well. Role playing.
Yep, all good. A friend of mine, when I made some snarky comment, data-based, but snarky comment on how ineffective lecturing is, he had a hurt expression on his face and said, well, it worked for me. So it's personal empiricism, as is the phrase. As analysts, I'm sure you've come across this a ton. These are evidence-based people who are ignoring or defying evidence. And this, I'm showing you this image because to just try to emphasize how ingrained this is in higher education. This is an illustrated manuscript from about the year 1300 from the University of Bologna. This gentleman I'm highlighting here is apparently named Henry of Germany, and he is lecturing. So as you can see, he's reading from a text, and we've made a lot of progress in 700 years because now most instructors will read from PowerPoint slides. But you look at those students in the pews, now they'd be in an auditorium, and you can see that some are sleeping, and some are chatting, and some are texting. So some things never change, including, it seems like, lecturing. So consider these statements. These are things I wrote down during faculty meetings that I heard, or that I've put out of the literature. Just read through these as I click. All right, now tell me, you look at those, what theme do you see, or what unifies these statements, or how would you characterize these claims?
Here's a few articles of faith. Simon, no evidence base. We think that was Alejandra. We think, we feel, we believe, not evidence based.
Yeah.
So a lot of not evidence assumptions, their beliefs,
right?
Think and feel, opinion, not data, perceptions. Whew. Self-assurance.
Yeah, thank you, George. So absolutely, and I've seen it and just been astonished, but I hear it over and over. Some of these statements come from international caliber, celebrated, award-winning scientists, people absolutely at the top of their field, but they go into teaching and immediately turn it off. All their training goes out the window, and it's just, what do I think? What do I know? I just going to emphasize, again, this question about how important your work is. This is not just, our work in higher education. It's general, because if you're not making decisions based on evidence, you're making decisions based on stuff you're making up. And when you do that, this is what we get. And, it's epidemic. This is the newspaper you read every morning. We have a crisis of evidence, and you're the kind of people who are going to help solve it. So we're starting with this claim that as institutions and as practitioners, we need to make evidence-based decisions. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want my choir to be fired up. And then the second thing is that colleges and universities need to become more inclusive. So let's look at some data on that claim. And we're starting with this question about promoting equity, because when I was growing up, it was just, to me, it was just this has to be true. I've heard it so many times, that education is the gateway to opportunity. Education is the way to get ahead, to realize your potential, and certainly you earn a higher income. And this data set came out of the Pell Institute at University of Pennsylvania in 2015, and I was going to conferences that year and the year following, and I swear it was almost on every slide. So if you have seen this, bear with me. If you haven't, I'll talk you through it just very quickly. So we've got time on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis is essentially the probability that these are data from the US, and it's broken down by income quartile, of bottom quartile in purple, next quartile, third, and upper income quartile in blue on the top here. And that's the probability, if you're a kid born into a family in that income quartile, over time, what's your probability of completing a 4-year degree, of getting a bachelor's? So Inhuva, please tell me, what's your takeaway from these data? How do you read this graph? Especially related to this question at the top of the slide.
Inequality grows, education promotes inequality, education increases gaps, doesn't really promote equity. Rich people make college graduates who become rich people. Makes me very angry. Or education for riches, Matthew effect, inequality, education just works for the top, the gap widens.
We're doing a great job of educating rich kids. So this was an eye-opener to me. I mean, it's, yeah, high impact. All right. You've probably seen these data, but on top of that completion data you just saw, of course, cost, and I'm hoping people in the audience today are working on this issue at your home institutions or in your home country. But the price of higher education, this is you've probably seen these. This is a consumer price index. So the horizontal line is all else equal, what the basic cost of living is. Food's gotten cheaper over time. Again, these are US data. Clothing has gotten cheaper. Medical care, is a big crisis in the US. Obama used to talk about, we've got to bend the cost curve. This is the curve he was talking about. Where's higher ed here? In Huva, where are you expecting it? Above or below the line?
3 times above, sharper curve, higher, top, high, through
Yeah.
the roof, up.
Complete through the roof, completely out of control. And again, I hope some people in this group are looking at causes, looking at solutions, because this, to me, it's not acceptable. So we have problems, equity problems with completion, and especially for students who are not completing, starting college, they're taking on this kind of debt, and with repercussions that are going to be generational. I have friends who are delaying families, career changes, and starting families or starting a life partnership because of their college debt. Okay, and just quickly on consequences, there's some more recent data published recently on this issue. Again, this is US data. This is a little simpler. It's not broken down by gender, so it masks gender disparities in lifetime earnings. But just look at the data for high school diploma versus bachelor's degree. And what are you seeing in terms of disparity in median lifetime earnings? How big a deal is a bachelor's in terms of earning power over lifetime? What number would you throw out based on this graph?
Double, about $1 million is what we're
About
hearing.
$1 million. Yep.
80% higher.
Yeah. So if you've got a partnership and both are college grads versus their friends from high school who stopped their education at high school, you're talking about $2 million difference. Again, US dollars. This is 2020 up to 2010 data. So boggling is these differences in achievement. All right. So we have a question based on data to this first. We have an answer to this first question that, in my mind, your work is extremely important. You're the people providing the evidence. You're the people who can help your institution understand where they have a problem with equity and inclusion, and I hope open some eyes with data. And I'm just going to emphasize anecdotally, this is a non-trivial issue. I have friends, especially when I'm feeling snarky, I call them cachet schools. So the highly selective, extremely prestigious schools around the US and around the world. My friends there who work on these kind of equity issues saying, I can't get data from my institution on student demographics or breakdown or by income level or race or ethnicity. And they say they don't want to know, which I find deeply distressing. But so the second issue about you guys doing work on highlighting the nature of the problem at your home institution or in your country isn't trivial, but it's work that has to be done. Okay, second question of our 3 for today's theme is how about what we now call evidence-based teaching? And I'm gonna use the term active learning impact overall everybody in STEM, all students. And I'm gonna start with some data from my own course. So I taught introductory biology. These are large enrollment courses. I'm going to show you 6 years of data from when I was just getting a research program started. When I started teaching, and all these terms are when I was the sole instructor of record. So we're controlling, in this data set, we're controlling for instructor identity. I had already taught a bunch, so I was already considered an experienced instructor, but I always team taught before. So I was teaching it on my own. So you're going to look at 6 terms of data. The 2 outcome variables, I'm going to show you some percentages, are 2 indices of failure in STEM. The first is this below 1.5 right here. So that is at my university at that time, if you got in the US system, which is a C plus D minus, you couldn't go on in biology. If you didn't get above that threshold, if your marks weren't better than that, you were out. This is the first course in a 3-course series, but you couldn't progress. So that was an outright failure in terms of your ability to major. And then if you got a below, again, on the US system, 2.5 or what's C plus, you were in a danger zone because the department might not let you major.
You're muted, Scott. I think you muted yourself. All right, just a second. Nicole, can you unmute Scott? Because I can't.
Yeah, I got it. Am I all right now?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. So sorry, I don't know when I went off. There are two indices of failure, D minus C plus in the US system or minus 2.5. You can't go on at all in biology, or you might not be able to major. So these are the two thresholds that students and faculty cared about. So when I first started teaching, I was lecturing because that's how I learned, and everybody should be like me. So I lectured, and my students were crashing and burning. We have extremely good students in terms of their secondary school education at the University of Washington. They were superstars in high school. And these data I'm showing you from these 6 terms, most of the students are second or third year. These were not first fall freshmen in this course at that time. We're teaching freshmen now. And this doesn't include withdrawal rates, this 18%. So including withdrawals, it was over 20% of students were crashing and burning in this course. And I was getting good student evaluations of teaching. I was popular because I learned student names, and you know, I would tell a joke once or two, or do something during lecture, like dance around or be entertaining or something like that. So I got high student evaluations. I was getting emails from my dean and my chair saying, "Scott, you're doing such a great job." And I would look at these data and be in my bathroom throwing up because I thought, I'm killing my students. What is wrong with my approach? So I call this low structure, where I'm not structuring the learning experience for students. I just talk, and then magically they're supposed to learn stuff that's hard. And then I sort of got religion about active learning was just becoming a thing in the early 2000s. So I started reading papers, and oh my God, maybe I can start to learn how to teach. This isn't something that's supposed to be just born into you or acquired by magic. So I started changing a little bit in what I call a medium structure course. So if you guys implemented personal response devices or polling devices or clickers, we call them back then, I started using those. And we administered, we could do some at that point, the web was good enough, we could do online practice tests to give students more practice for their exams, which were short answer. And we got the first significant drop in the failure rate in the history of the program. Still way too high. And then I kept reading, kept listening to people, kept trying things. And I went to what I call a high structure model. Now people call it flipping or blended or different names for the same thing. This is where you're doing a pre-class quiz. So you're doing all the information, vocabulary acquisition, low-level stuff before class. And we've got the currently in a lot of the courses in this intro series with tons of different instructors, we're at a failure rate less than 5% on average year to year. So this was I thought, spectacular result. And this last line you're seeing at the bottom left here, the percentage of A's went to almost 25%, and we quantified that exams got harder. So students weren't doing better because the class was getting somehow softer. Exams were getting quantifiably more rigorous by several different metrics that you can read about in this paper. Okay, but that's one course, one instructor, one student population. How about everybody else? So I started the meta-analysis that George referred to at the start of the session. And we looked at papers starting in 1942 to 2010 from anywhere in the world, any STEM discipline. And if you've done a meta-analysis, you know you have to set out your criteria for inclusion. So we were dichotomizing instruction very crudely. Any active learning intervention, and a few examples are shown up here, versus traditional lecturing, meaning basically you're talking over 90% of the time in class, you, the instructor. We only looked at data sets that came from regularly scheduled courses, so no educational experiments that were outside of an actual course environment. It was all about just the class sessions themselves, not homeworks or labs or recitations. And all the STEM disciplines were included in this search. And we had to have data on student performance, either exam scores, and they had to be identical exams. We were absolutely strict about that. Either objective criteria saying they were equally rigorous. No, some friends looked at it and thought the exams were just as hard. That got kicked out of the study. And then we also looked at failure rates. I'm going to refer to those as DFW, which is common in the literature. So that's D grades, F grades, and withdrawals. So with the failure rate data initially, you have a plus minus. It's like in biomedicine where you have, did the patient die? Did the patient live? You calculate with this therapy, you calculate an odds ratio. So we got that result. We said, great. Well, I mean, not so great. If you're lectured to, the odds of you failing the course are 1.94 higher than they are with any kind of active learning going on average across these many studies. But normal people don't think in terms of odds ratio. So I had a dinner at my house and invited a bunch of my statistics and education research friends over and opened some beers and said, okay, you guys, how do we communicate this odds ratio to normal people? And this is what we came up with, this list. So the average failure rate would increase if across all these studies, about just under 22% under active learning, 33.8% under lecturing. So about a 12% difference, 55% increase in failure if you're being lectured to. The risk ratio was 1.5, another way to express an odds ratio. So you interpret that as that you're 1.5 times more likely to fail. I put these two in red because these were all in the original paper that was published in 2014. The ones in red are the ones that came back to us that seemed to hit people like, oh my God, they got quoted back, or I'd see them cited. This one refers to biomedical randomized controlled trials, RCTs, stop for benefit. So if you've been in that world at all, you know that it's routine in most countries when you approve biomedical studies like drug studies, that if you're going to enroll, that your study plan says, I'm going to enroll 5,000 people, that if you're analyzing data and you get to 3,000 and you've got your relative risk is about 0.5 in the range listed here, or the p-value on the treatment difference is below 0.001, you're allowed to stop the study for benefit, meaning it's already so clear that the patients are benefiting, it's unethical to continue. And our results with active learning were clearly within these two criteria. And so the punchline is, if college instruction were a randomized controlled trial in biomedicine, it would have been stopped for benefit a long time ago, meaning that it qualifies as educational malpractice, meaning personal injury attorneys could sue if you're lecturing. But don't get me started there. Okay. And almost nobody paid attention to this last one, that it would save students a ton of money in tuition, which broke my heart a little bit, but it's like, oh, it's their money, not mine. So this is what the data look like. And just tell me how you read this graph. These are the samples from different STEM disciplines. So 7 studies from biology, 14 in chemistry, and so forth. There were a total of 67 with failure rate data. This is the average, 12%. And these are 95% confidence intervals, the horizontal lines. So how do you interpret these data when we break it down by discipline?
As soon as I get some comments in Whova, I will share them with you. Currently, we're having awkward digital silence.
I've been yakking too much. People are gonna sleep.
Consistent improvements in all.
Yeah, except for geology.
Yeah, because we're taking notes. Sad that even with active learning, institutions are not supporting a fifth of the students to succeed. A lot of instructor variability within the fields.
Yeah, good.
Geology has some problems.
Yeah, thanks on that last comment. I gave this talk, showed this graph to a geology educators conference, about 600 people in a room. When I showed this graph, you could have heard a pin drop in there, man. They were like, oh man, we got to get on this. Okay, that was the failure rate data with exam scores. The overall effect size difference is 0.47. This is, if you know this, this stuff, this is Hedges G, so it's in units of standard deviations. And again, to translate it sort of into what makes sense to students and parents, it's about, on average, a 6% increase in exam scores, which translates to about a 0.3 increase, or half a letter grade. Again, we get strong results over all of the STEM disciplines. We had many more studies where we could find exam scores. There were 158. And this is my little cue. This was far and away the largest and most comprehensive meta-analysis of contrasted active learning and traditional lecturing. So we got a grand mean of 0.47. The other two were 0.5 and 0.51, I think. So that this half a standard deviation increase in how all students do on exams seems to be pretty robust. Oh, and then this is my reminder, in K through 12, the standard in the field is that if you're doing a study and you get an effect size of 0.2, it's reason for policy change. So in the higher ed, that 0.5 or 0.47 in this case just blows that out of the water. So this paper had a ton of impact. It's been downloaded over 560,000 times or something like that. It's getting close to 6,000 citations. So if you're in conversation, use this thing. A lot of people have at least heard about it in a vague way, but it's been effective, which is the goal of a meta-analysis, just sort of bring things together and let people see the big picture. Again, international, upper division, lower division, large classes, small classes. You can read the paper and look at all the heterogeneity analyses on those questions. So yes, on average, all students benefit. Last thing, and back to the title of the talk about inclusion, where a lot of us live and breathe. So I want to spend a couple minutes on a recent paper we published about a year ago in Science Advances on quantifying just what achievement gaps are like in core courses on my campus at the University of Washington. These core chemistry courses I'm referring to now are Gen Chem, general chemistry. Again, we're on a quarter system here, so there are 3 of them in the first year. Most students start as first fall freshmen, and then they go on to organic chemistry. Those are the other 3 to total 6. So this is most engineering programs on my campus, all the life sciences, students who want to be pre-health, entrepreneurs in life sciences, biotechnology would have to take these courses. So we looked at 15 years of data, almost 26,000 students, and we were quantifying inequities between overrepresented students, which in the US are Caucasians and Asian Americans, meaning that this is National Science Foundation lingo, that they're overrepresented in terms of comparing representation in the general population versus science careers. And then what used to be called underrepresented groups, we started calling minoritized groups in STEM, are those who are not represented at parity or at equity in STEM professions. Okay, and some notes on what those demographics are at the bottom. So we were looking at just how are these students in these minoritized groups doing in STEM. So this is a notch plot. So interquartile range here is in green, and the notch is the median. So what are you seeing in terms of the average grade difference across this enormous data set? This is in the, again, the course that most students take as soon as they walk into college. This is their first STEM course and their gateway to a career in science. Based on the axis, the scale, what's the grade difference on average?
All right, just getting a few come in. So 1 letter grade, extreme variance, minus 0.5, about half a letter grade. Even outliers are mostly below 0. Almost everyone is below.
Yep, exactly. Good.
I think that's all.
And these are raw data, or what we call transcriptable data. This is just the numbers that show up on a transcript. And we always like to look at raw data because it's what the students in the med schools in my field, what the med schools and the pharmacy schools look at for admissions, and what students use to make decisions of, am I going to continue in this field or not? But we almost always look at, in fact, I think we always look at model data where we're controlling for indices of student preparation and ability. So in this case, we used in the US, the Common College Entrance Exam is the SAT, and then HSGPA is high school GPA. Sometimes in other courses, we can use college GPA, which is even more, explains more variation in student performance. So what do you see here? This is a little tougher call than the first number I asked you to give. What does it mean? First, what does it mean, the difference between raw and modeled, controlled for preparation and ability? And what does it mean that this is still significantly highly significantly non-zero. Right, so here we're doing an all else equal comparison. If you take a Asian American or Caucasian student and compare it to a Hispanic or African American or Pacific Islander student with exactly the same high school GPA, exactly the same SAT, this is the difference you would see. So 2 issues in Hoover, please. What does this difference between these two mean, and what does the difference from 0 mean for the modeled results?
Right, so very consistent negative effects. Different between raw and modeled means that the inequity starts earlier.
Yeah.
And
yep, perfect. So you're quantifying how much of the performance difference is based on ability and preparation, which is mostly about family income. And there are good papers in physics literature on this, nailing that down. Any ideas on what it means that this is still non-zero? Even controlling for these, all else equal in terms of how well students are doing as students, you still have a gap. What does that say to you?
Hearing gap is increasing. Cultural capital, systemic racism.
Exactly. So we're seeing students who are underperforming. There's something going on in these classrooms and I'll use the word punishing these students. And I bring this up and I'm trying to pound it home with you guys, because on your campuses, you hear people say, usually people are more careful than they were 10 years ago, but they say that, well, that's the student's fault. I can't help that, right? They're not good enough. Or they're not prepared enough if they're being generous. But you look at data like this and say, that's not the whole story. It's some of it, but not all. Okay, there's something about the way you're teaching. Now, you just looked at these data. This was for underrepresented minorities, so African Americans, Latinos, Latinas, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders. These are the data for women. Again, same course, general chemistry. These are achievement gaps. This is for low socioeconomics. So these are low income, regardless of ethnicity. So there are white kids in here, Asian American kids, students in here. And this is for first generation. FGN is first in family to complete a 4-year degree. So look at these data for a minute, if you could, and tell me what you're seeing. There's a ton going on here. So, and I'll just cue you, if someone could look at the pattern for women is different. You got any?
Yeah, one point is SES is the biggest factor.
Yeah, SES is huge.
Just waiting for others. More of a gap for some groups. The range gets smaller when controlling for SAT, HSGPA.
Yep. What are you guys seeing for women?
Tightly clustered for women.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. And to me, that says that differences in ability and preparation, and it's mostly going to be about preparation, are not as big a deal for women, but there's still a gap for women. So something is going on that has impact based on student gender identity. All right, and there are consequences. I encourage you guys to if this is your role on your campus, to do these kinds of analyses. I think it turned out to be very powerful. These are just general, if you do ecology stuff at all, these are survivorship curves. So you're looking at cohorts of everybody who started, 100% of the students, if they started the series in Gen Chem, how many are left after Gen Chem 1, 2, 3, organic 1, 2, 3. If you're a minoritized group, if you're a non-minoritized group. And this is raw and modeled. So again, huge gaps. I mean, for Caucasians and Asian Americans, the attrition is brutal. You're going from 100% of students wanting to go into STEM to what, 65% or something left at the end of 2 years. But it's beyond brutal. It's just catastrophic for minoritized groups, where you're down to low 20%. And it, again, persists. It's not just about preparation. There's something about STEM classrooms that's not working, or actually actively discriminating against minoritized groups. Okay, that's all upsetting and not very nice. There is some really good news here in the data. And this is what I ended up calling it the hyper persistent zone. So I'm going to show you data for women here at the top of this graph. And notice this is the probability of persisting in chemistry, so the purple line, or dropping out of chemistry together, and then or retaking the course if you fail it initially, for students, again, in this really gateway pivotal course, Gen Chem 1. And what we noticed in these data is that if you're female, and you don't do well, you're getting a 1 on a 4-point scale, 1 point, low 1 points or worse, you're just done. You're walking away. Much more likely to do that than guys are, males are. But if you do okay, and for most students at my campus, you get a C, C minus, that's considered a personal disaster. But even if you do that well, you just barely pass, women are much more likely to persist than men. Isn't that cool? I saw these data, I just lit up. I said, oh my God, there's something here. Like, if you do badly, it's catastrophic. Like you can't, the minoritized groups are not going to recover. But if you just do okay, it's like, okay, I can do this, that things start building. We've seen the same pattern for racial and ethnic minorities. I'm highlighting here based on income level. These differences are all highly significant. And if you look at the numbers, really meaningful in terms of the numbers of students continuing. We don't see it for first generation students, and I don't know why. That's a mystery right now. So anyway, this paper was the first to document this. And again, it's one campus, one course sequence. I'd love for people like you guys to do it elsewhere. Okay, solutions. Solving the problem. Start quickly with data from my own course. If you remember the lecturing, medium start, we're doing clickers, we're doing a practice test for an hour a week. And then high structure, where I'm just making the students work all the time. We saw, this is the achievement gap. So if there's 0 achievement gap, you're down here on the x-axis. They were huge in terms of grade points before I went to the high structure model, and then it just crashed. The gaps didn't quite go away. You can see our standard error bars here, almost hitting 0, but not quite. So we had this result was published in Science in 2011, about 10 years ago. And again, same question. Well, that's one instructor, one course, one student population. How about everybody else? And these are the more recent data published actually almost exactly a year ago today. And I have to say, remember that overall student data was downloaded, whatever it is, 500 sometime, 1,000 times. This paper, I'm going to show you that these data came out the day that Italy went into full lockdown for COVID, and the day that I think the Standard & Poor's index, economic index in the US stock market crashed. They had its biggest drop in history because people got rattled about COVID. So this paper is like, oh, nobody saw it. There were bigger things going on. Anyway, we wanted to disaggregate data. We looked at how everybody was doing across STEM. And I put this asterisk on here because this was hard. Like, we contacted every author in those 225 studies from the 2014. Only 14% knew they could disaggregate by family income or race or ethnicity. It's like people are not studying this, even though in the literature, people have been using the word crisis to characterize achievement gaps in higher education for over 100 years. So we need to study this stuff. You got back to question number 1, how important are you? So we looked at exam scores. We did find 51 experiments, 170 that had data on passing rates and disaggregated again by family income or race and ethnicity, where we could look at the two groups and compare the performance in the same course, usually with the same instructor. And Ellie Theobald, who was the first author on this study, used the hierarchical Bayesian regression approach to look at these data. Really interesting technical problems that she solved really brilliantly. Anyway, back to the data. These are what the gaps look like for passivist lecturing, where students are passive versus active in the classroom. Again, huge gaps. Under any active learning, gaps improve a lot on average across STEM. So that was a huge result, but I want to stress, because people have leapt to this, this is actually from the 2014 study. This is a graph of failure rates across those 67 studies and the 12% difference is in red here. What's going on with these ones that we've shaded in black?
Getting worse was one point.
Yep.
They're doing worse in active learning.
Yep.
Some getting worse with active learning.
Exactly. And we saw the same thing in the GAP study. There were interventions in our data set that made gaps worse. On average, they shrunk them a lot. I mean, enough to really care about, but it is not a magic bullet. Like I remind people, you can kill yourself with aspirin or water if you want to. You can do active learning badly and harm your students. So remind your colleagues in your institution, like, this is serious. We need to do this right. And we know what to do. So for example, we found in this data set, in this paper that was published a year ago, that we did have some data on intensity, just a crude metric of how much class time, and it really was bimodal. People either did a tiny bit of active learning, like the students are working less than a third of the time, or they did a lot. The students are working over 2/3. And that's where things really popped, where if you're doing a lot of active learning, we can almost eliminate gaps in failure rates, which to me was just eye-popping. Because remember, active learning hasn't been around that long. I mean, 15 years ago, those data I was showing you were from 2005, 2006. That was a big deal. Like, that was news to people. So we're going to get a lot better. And I think if we keep after this with the help from folks like you, we can solve this problem. So yes, we can do this. We have the tools, and we should be able to get a lot better. So what are we working on now? We want to find out, what is it about active learning? What, if you're going to train colleagues in how to have an equitable, inclusive classrooms, we've got to have some tools, specific tools. That's a big project we're starting right now. That was STEM, the data I showed you. We don't know what's going on in humanities and social sciences. If that's your area, man, go for it. Do it. We need the data from you. And then this, to me, is a $64,000 question that I hope some of you are working on, is metrics of teaching effectiveness. And, it comes down to hiring and promotion. Like, if you do a crummy job in your teaching, are you going to get paid the same as people who do a spectacular job and allows all students to succeed? Right now, that's not true. So 2 statements really wrap up this work. We need evidence-based teaching. And again, I was so excited to be invited to work at this conference. And second, we have the tools. The data have spoken. We know what to do. Now it's a matter of getting it done. So we have a vision of the past. We have a vision of the future. And with that, I'll close thanking granting agencies, National Science Foundation, my home institution, Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The 2 meta-analyses were unfunded, so I always have to credit caffeine and plastic. And thank you very much. We can take some questions now, I think, before wrapping up the conference.
Sure. If you want to, Scott, you can kill screen sharing so that we get your entire glorious face.
George, would you mind, or Nicole, would you mind killing it for me? I've lost my controls again.
So while she's removing or pausing your screen sharing, I'll just ask the first question. There's a couple of questions starting to come in now. So one was, where we go, these things keep moving. Uva, why you got to be this way? So one question was, one of my relatives is a student who finished the whole series in intro biology class at UW, found the experimental conditionist class very, very rushed. Would you comment on some of the pros and cons of scheduling a tight course materials in this university-wide class? How to exert more influence on the human-centered design to shape the intro to biology class community to be even better overall?
Yeah, a couple comments on that. Great question. First, the results I'm showing you are on average. So, I've heard from students who are introverted or students who aren't speaking English fluently yet, and we have English-based instruction, that this environment's tough. And so on average, we know everybody's doing better. So that's compelling to make change, but we need to pay attention to students where this might be making things more difficult. So that's a challenge for the future. Also, let's see, you referred to things being tight. It is very fast paced. And that's kind of something I don't apologize for. We give a and quantifiably really rigorous course at the University of Washington. But students know that when they apply. So it's, they're in the big leagues, they're ambitious, we want to support them. But we are getting better. We're doing more work on group dynamics and always collecting research. I actually retired from teaching about 1.5 years ago. And partly the reason was that we have a lot of young faculty and postdocs coming up, and they go into these classrooms and adopt this high structure model. And I'm sitting there watching them. I'm supposed to be mentoring them. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they're way better at this than I am. I got to get out of here, get out of their way. So I think part of the issue was that again, we'll get a lot better, and the kind of issues you highlighted for your, was it your niece or nephew, I hope are better.
All right, we've got another 6 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in. Here's one from Melissa. I'm just going to abbreviate a little bit, but people have questioned the strong focus on small grade difference, as opposed to also looking at factors such as sense of belonging that may have equal or greater relationships in persistence in STEM. Yeah. Curious to know your thoughts. Can active learning help here as well?
Yes, thank you. Oh yeah, fantastic. So the short answer is we don't know. That is the focus. I told you we're starting a project now to try to figure out what is it about active learning. Our hypothesis is that there are two issues, because remember, if everybody's doing better and equally better, nothing happens to gaps. You have to have an intervention that's disproportionately beneficial to the students who've been underachieving or underperforming. And so we're trying to figure out what is it about an active classroom. And our hypothesis is two things. One is deliberate practice. That fast pace that the first question referred to is practice, and it's hard, it's deliberate. We're making students uncomfortable, we're pushing them, just the way you would if you were learning violin or how to hit a soccer ball. It's hard. So that's part of it, we think, is deliberate practice that students are getting in an active learning classroom. We think that's a disproportionate benefit because low-income students might not have had that experience before. So when they finally get a good coach, they finally get a good piano teacher, they finally get a good drama coach, they just do way better. The second thing is, we think, is what you referred to about sense of belonging. And I agree that it's probably as or more important than the deliberate practice aspect, is that in an active learning classroom, it's noisy, you're talking to your colleagues, you're sitting next to the same people, you're feeling community, you know each other's names, the instructor might be learning your name because you're having to respond in class a lot. And it's a completely different environment where you feel like, I might belong here. Like the professor was actually interested in my idea about how to interpret that graph. And there's some data sets coming out of Cornell and a couple other programs, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, suggesting that that's so. They have good survey data saying students are feeling a much higher sense of community and belonging in active learning classrooms, which is, as you mentioned in your class, just so important, especially for students who are, walk into a room and say, I'm not sure I belong here.
Great. Another question then came, which this is a proverbial one that I think higher education has grappled with for a long time. But given your time now and as shifting into an emeritus role, what are your thoughts about how to convince higher education institutions to hire great teachers who focus more on active learning, but may not be as focused on being great researchers?
Oh, that is I remind people, colleges and universities are set up to resist change, and it's served them well. They've weathered plagues, global pandemics, world wars, famines, and they've endured. But the tenure system and the fact that, money flows into departments for specific positions, and all mitigates against change. And you guys could probably, go on and on and on about the things you beat your head against the wall trying to change. I do think we can change the ask. It's a reasonable ask for us to say, could we just use some evidence to make decisions about teaching? It's going to be hard to hear people say, no, I don't want to, I'm a scholar, but I don't want to use evidence to make decisions. So you've got that lever. Another one that's, I think, is potentially transformative, and some campuses are taking, not my own, unfortunately, but some around the US and around the world are taking the lead, is in using analytics to evaluate teaching. So some folks at this conference might be involved. They're good tools to quantify classroom practice now, called classroom observation tools. There are probably at least a dozen published. And so you can get numbers showing how much evidence-based teaching are my faculty doing, and correlate those to changes in student performance. So instead of using student evaluations of teaching, which has been the classic metric of teaching quality, and since we've known for over 40 years, are biased. And if you use bad data, you'll make bad decisions. So this is something we have to break, is coming up with better analytics to evaluate teaching, to make hiring and promotion decisions. But the key, sorry for prattling around, this is really close to my heart. The key thing, I always express what I consider the tragedy of higher education, is that, so I was teaching intro bio, I would have 700 students in the next hour, 500 students, 1,200 students in the course. That would make my university in tuition well over $1 million every term. So in tuition, even accounting for financial aid, which is extensive at my institution. So, but the tragedy is that if I do a terrible job and 20% of my students fail, or if I do a fantastic job and we're getting equitable outcomes from students who are first in their family to go to college, or from poverty-stricken backgrounds, or racial, minoritized groups, I get paid the same. And my university makes exactly the same amount of money. As my chair says, there is no incentive for quality. In research, yes, there's incentive for, only certain people get their papers published. Only certain people get, a big lab or a big office space. Only certain people get awards. We've got to bring that metrics for quality, assessment of quality, into teaching.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Scott. We are at the end of the keynote. There are some number of questions I did not have a chance to ask you. So if you are available sometime over the next, later today or next day or so, feel free to drop in there and respond to those. Again, want to say thanks for a great talk and really motivating the evidence-based view of how to do a better job of helping students, regardless of who they are, be successful in higher education. For the rest of you, we are staying in this room and moving directly into a sort of a general Q&A / wrap-up thing. This is where the delightful and pleasant Grace Lynch will take over with Nicole and run the balance of the meeting. So Scott, again, thank you. And all of you for joining in, thank you as well. Enjoy the day.
Thank you. All right, Nicole, can we stop this recording and start a new one?